So Bitcoin and Ethereum both have been going down drastically the last couple of weeks, and there is no end in sight, there is no reversal in sight, no inflection point. And there's a very interesting theory that came out today, and I would like to explain this as simply as possible. And it is a theory from our good friend Tom Lee, who is of course the chairman of Bitmine Immersion, who is a big backer of Ethereum, who really believes in Ethereum, who also believes in the crypto market. So according to Tom Lee, this whole trouble, everything that we're dealing with right now, started on October 10th. So what was October 10th? It was the day that the government shut down. And this was very interesting because usually they negotiate the government shutdown, and like hours before it was supposed to happen, they come to an agreement and the shutdown does not happen. However, this time it did happen, and it lasted for 40 days. So this created a huge wave of liquidity drain for all the market makers. Of course, also market makers, so people that provide bid and ask spread, they also provide these for Bitcoin. They also provide these for Ethereum. Now, they had like this whole in their balance sheet. So they were providing this liquidity, and all of a sudden they did not have that liquidity anymore, and they need to fill that. They need to like supply their account with money again. So how do they do that? They do that by selling off. So they need sell orders in Bitcoin to keep selling Bitcoin and generate cash. So they need to get rid of that inventory of Bitcoin and generate cash to make sure they are whole again. So they're not in the red again when it comes to liquidity. So when this happened on at October 10th day and those days forward, there are some malicious players right now in the crypto market that notice that these market makers have that gap, and they're eager to selling their Bitcoin, they're eager of selling their Ethereum. And the way this crypto market works is that the prices are decentralized. It means that if you get a quote from your exchange, then this is not the same as the other exchange. So they don't really communicate with each other to really provide liquidity. So that is something that's very different when it comes to stocks, when it comes to options. So right now, these market makers, they operate independently. So right now, there are some malicious players that say, hey, this market maker, he needs the liquidity, and he also has a lot of over leveraged buyers in his system. So a lot of people do trades with these market makers, and they are over leveraged. So these malicious sellers, they kind of find these people and they attack the highly over leveraged buyers of Bitcoin, the highly over leveraged buyers of Ethereum as well. So they attack these players until they finally drop the coin, big enough that they have to liquidate. And of course, the market maker wants to liquidate as quickly as possible. So he wants the over leveraged buyer to liquidate his position so he can finally get that liquidity back on his balance sheet. So this is how these three parties kind of operate. You have the malicious player that finds the over leveraged buyer, attacks him, and the market maker kind of complies with the malicious player. They say, yes, thank you, you finally got rid of that over leveraged player. Now I can finally get that liquidity back because I had that liquidity hole and I have to pay interest on that. I'm in the red, and this is not a good thing for the market maker. So the only way when this kind of reversal will happen is if all the leverage players are out of the system. They need to stop, they need to be out of the game, and then all these malicious players, they will not do this anymore. And the second thing, of course, is we now have little regulation when it comes to crypto. We have little regulation when it comes to Bitcoin, to Bitmine immersion. However, there is maybe some kind of regulation necessary to make sure that this kind of attacks cannot happen again. They cannot target the over leverage player that's kind of working within this network of this market maker, and they say, hey, this is a small market maker, he's operating for this leverage player, let's attack him, let's make sure he gets liquidated, and then the price drops even further and further and further. So they're doing this with Bitcoin, they're doing this with Ethereum, and they notice that there's a lack of liquidity, so they can keep on going and going until the market maker feels that liquidity. Now, so regulation will help with this. However, something else that will work is, of course, when the liquidity gets whole again. When the market makers fulfill that liquidity requirement again, maybe by the government, maybe by the Federal Reserve, they say, hey, here's your money, you can borrow again. Quantitative tightening will kind of ease, and this will all be beneficial for the market makers. So this is something that you need to consider, that if this liquidity drain continues, so if there's still no liquidity in the crypto market, then these malicious players will attack the over leveraged player, and they will keep attacking him, and they will drop the price of Bitcoin and Ethereum over and over again. So that's why there's no end in sight yet, unless the liquidity returns and there is some regulation in place that says, hey, there's right now a malicious player attacking crypto over players again, and we need to get rid of him. We need to have some regulation with that. So this is right now the situation. However, I also want to talk a bit more about MSTR specifically, because I have a huge kind of theory about MSTR. So one thing is that MSTR will be added to the S&P 500 end of December, when the rebalancing happens. So this is really bullish for MSTR. And also you need to consider that once MSTR gets added to the S&P 500, this will also add a lot of liquidity. So all these problems with liquidity will be out of order for this stock again. So it will be beneficial again for this stock. So this is something that you need to consider for MSTR as well.